Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fiona Woolacombe, and I'm the chair of King's Arms Yard, VCT. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the company's annual general meeting. And alongside me today, my fellow directors, Swarupa Pataki, Thomas Chambers, and a new face for you, Simon Thorpe, who joined the board on the 1st of September 2023. And I hope you will join me in welcoming him. As stated in the annual report, Thomas Chambers, it's a big day. He retires from our board today. And having served over 12 years as a director of the company, I've had a great privilege of working alongside Thomas since 2019. On behalf of the board, I can't thank him enough for his diligence and professionalism during his tenure, and I wish him very well for the future. He's been a great asset to the trust, and shareholders will have benefited hugely by having him on board. I am, however, delighted to say that Simon Thorpe will succeed Thomas as chairman of the Audit and Risk Committee and will also take the position of senior independent director. Also present today is Will Fraser-Allen, who is the managing partner of Albion Capital, the company's investment manager, and he'll shortly give us a presentation on the results of the company for the year ended 31 December 2023. Moving on to the formal business, the quorum for the AGM is 2 members entitled to vote in person or by proxy, and I can confirm that this has been met. And I now declare formally the AGM open. The notice of the meeting has been in your hands for the statutory period, and so I will take the notice as read. Due to the success of previous year's virtual AGMs and to maximise engagement with shareholders, the board have again arranged for the Lumi team to broadcast this year's AGM using its online platform, which actually enables members to fully interact, including taking part in a question and answer session and also voting on the board's proposed resolutions. Before I hand over to Will for his presentation, I'd like to explain how the voting process actually works. But please let me first state that if you've already submitted a proxy vote to the registrar, you don't need to vote again unless you wish to change your vote. The resolutions will be voted on by way of a poll. The votes received under this process will be added to the proxy notes that have already been received and verified by your independent registrar, Computershare. Once I declare the poll open on the Lumi platform, a list of resolutions will automatically appear on the screen. Please select the option that corresponds with how you want to vote, and the option will change colour. And then a confirmation message will appear to indicate that your vote has been cast and received. To vote on all the resolutions displayed, please select the Vote All option at the top of the screen. If you wish to change your vote, you have the option to reselect your choice. If you do have any questions on the voting procedure, please send them through the platform and someone in the Albion team will respond very promptly. I now declare the poll open. And turning to the main business of the AGM. Following the manager's presentation, the director and the manager will take questions from members on the company's financial results and proposed AGM resolutions. I'd like to thank members who've already submitted their questions and queries through the chairman's email address. If you wish to ask a question, please do select the messaging icon from within the navigation bar and type your question at the top of the screen. Click on the arrow icon to the right of the text box to submit your question. Please do so as soon as possible so that it will reach us ahead of that section. I'd now like to hand over to Will to make his presentation about the company. Thank you.
Fiona, thank you very much. So if we now turn to my presentation, I'd like to talk you all through the results for the year ended 31 December 2023. And because we just issued the IMS for the first quarter, I will also be able to give you an update of what has happened in terms of fund performance since then. So if I turn to the next slide, please. I won't dwell on this, but the plan is to give you a good run through of both what has happened in terms of new investments, in terms of performance, and then talk a little about some of the other key areas that we are working on. If I turn to the next slide, please. In terms of performance for the year, we have to put this in the context of the broader investment environment, which was still somewhat challenging, particularly for young technology companies. And I do differentiate between that and some of the results that we're seeing for very large companies, particularly on the US quoted markets, which saw a decent upturn by the end of the year. So we delivered a return of 0.42p, which was a 2.2% return on opening NAV. So this was behind target. As you know, we target to at least cover our 5% dividend target. So disappointing in that sense. But in the context of a particularly challenging period for small technology, particularly software companies, we were pleased. And I'll go on to talk a bit about how performance has been since then. Dividend paid of 1.05p and 20.37p was our final closing NAV. So if we move to the next slide, I can pick up some of the key topics here. So first of all, just to let everybody know that the board has decided to change the name of the company to Albion VCT PLC. And the reason for doing that is so that there is greater alignment between the names of the 6 VCTs that Albion managed. What has been brought to our attention was that it was becoming quite confusing having some companies with the Albion name and therefore easily recognizable as managed by Albion, and then funds that had completely different names. So to make life a bit simpler and less confusing, the board has decided to change the name, and that process is underway and will be happening, will formally happen over the next few weeks. Just briefly on the sort of macro, and clearly the world has moved on since then, but under the year under review, there was still a considerable geopolitical turmoil, and indeed there still is. And in terms of the macro, there really was very sluggish growth in the UK. Interest rates remained high, but inflation was beginning to come down. But if we think about the portfolio and our focus, we very much focus on mission critical software with recurring income streams, and that's continued to be a good place to be. So all in all, a reasonable year, but slightly behind target. So if we move to the next slide, we can look at our performance over the short and the longer term. And this is important because venture capital portfolios shouldn't be looked at purely on a one-year basis. They're very long-term investments. We typically hold investments for up to 8 years. So I particularly focus on the longer duration. So if you look at the 10-year return at 64.2%, that is on average 6.4%, which is above that critical 5% dividend target, albeit the last 12 months has been more difficult. If we move on. So what happened in the year? If we think about the sort of broader fund, we continue to do an annual fundraising. This year, fundraising in terms of quantum was lower. It's just over 7 million, but that was because the previous year had 2 allotments rather than 1 this year. So it's really mostly a timing difference. Exits were significantly lower than last year, and that reflects the much slower M&A market, the mergers and acquisitions market in 23. So this has been a general feature of the year, and we were not immune to it. That, having said that, we did manage to sell off a lot, and I've got a slide on that coming up. Investment rate, again, significantly down on the previous year. That is consistent with the VC industry generally, and that was very much around the sort of general uncertainty being felt by young companies and indeed larger companies that was discouraging them from raising money and tending to look to reduce their costs to delay investment rate. So what we have seen this year is that investment rate has ticked up as we expected it to, as companies come back to the market to raise money and as confidence steadily builds. Share buybacks much in line with expectations, and dividends are very much driven by our dividend policy, which is to pay around 5% of the VCT's NAV. So if we move on, it's worth sort of reflecting what has driven the value increase and indeed what have been the detractors. So Quantexa, which is the largest investment in the in the portfolio is an important one. And I've got a slide where I look at the top three, but they did a very successful Series E funding in 2023, where they raised money from GIC, which is the Singapore wealth fund, at a valuation in excess of £1 billion. Egress, we've seen great trading, and I'll talk a little bit more about Egress in terms of events that have happened since the year end. But this growth in the year that we're talking about was very much driven by underlying trading performance, and particularly its increasing success in selling its software in the US. That said, we did have some companies that did less well, and I'm afraid that is a feature of a venture portfolio. Alongside the successes, you will have ones that don't go so well, and the examples of that are Black Swan and indeed Solidators. Various other write-ups and write-downs. Time doesn't permit me to go through all of them, but just to remind everybody that there is a full list of the movements in the portfolio in the annual report for those that want to dig into the detail. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Portfolio analysis. So this is reminding us that we do running a portfolio of 64 companies, 4,600 people, and the allocation is very much as we anticipate and plan, that there is this focus on software and healthcare, a little bit of renewables, and then cash, which is there to allow us to undertake our investment activities, pay dividends, and fund buybacks. We move on to the next slide. We look at the portfolio in various ways, and this is all about looking at how mature is a portfolio. And I suggest two possible ways you can think about it here. And those that have attended many of these AGMs will be familiar with this. The idea that you can look at stage in the sense of what level of revenues a company's doing. So the larger the revenue, the more mature, the less volatile is the expectation. And that's on the left-hand side. As you can see, the portfolio by value is actually much more exposed to the higher revenue companies than you might expect, given the early stage. That said, as I always highlight, early stage investments are very much and are very important to our investment strategy, because it's those young companies that we fund and then continue to fund as they grow. So it is very much a feature of a venture portfolio. And then we look at it in terms of numbers of employees too. We move to the next slide, please. This is a slide I always highlight because it just reminds us that one of the features of a healthy venture portfolio is what we call the outliers, those investments that do particularly well and drive returns. So the three biggest companies will, by definition, become a larger proportion of the portfolio. So concentration risk is how we describe it. And the three companies being Quantexa, Pravica, and Egress, as we highlight on the slide, account for 32.7% of NAV as at December. And I can talk a bit more about how that's grown a little bit more since March in a moment. But those businesses doing well. Quantexa uses artificial intelligence, particularly to help with identity resolution. So big use of that is the large banks when they're detecting financial crime. But I think where interesting thing for Quantexa is they are becoming an increasingly global business, so selling their software globally and starting to sell that software into sectors outside the banking. Pravica is our children's medicines business, again making great progress. They've now got 2 drugs on the market, up from 1 that they had this time last year, and we're now seeing real evidence of the portfolio of further drugs coming through. So this is moving from a single drug company to a multiple drug company, and proving that they're a platform where they can create value through creating this portfolio. So again, exciting. Egress has continued to make good progress. You saw the valuation uplift as their revenue increased. So this is our email and data encryption business. And as I will come on to, that success has led to M&A activity, and we recently announced that we are to exit that Egress. So the terms of that exit have been agreed, but the completion is subject to regulatory sign-off. So that's a bit of something we're working on currently, but will give rise in due course to a very good return. If we move to the next slide, we continue to make new investments. That's the lifeblood of what we do. That's reseeding the portfolio post exits, and very much in our themes of software, healthcare, within software, looking at areas like fintech, digital risk, and increasingly we are starting to have an exposure to a number of climate tech investments. So if I just pick out these briefly, just some examples, you've got Open Dialogue, which is very much playing to the AI revolution that's happening around us. It helps companies manage their customer service through using large language models and generative AI in terms of interacting with customers. GridCog is very much in climate tech. This helps large corporates manage their transition to a more renewable energy portfolio. So this is where corporates are installing solar, car charging, and it manages these quite complex projects of managing the transition to ultimately net zero. I won't go through all these in detail, but Kennex is a good example within fintech that's allowing companies that are providing alternative finance to run their business using Kennex as their operating platforms. And Mondra is again another climate tech business which looks at the provenance of supply chains, particularly for large supermarkets. So looking at how sustainable the product is that's being sourced. So if I move to the next slide, we pick up Open Dialogue. This is all very much around that idea that all companies will want to benefit from large language models using AI to improve customer service. It's clearly an area where you can make a significant difference by bringing in more effective customer interaction through customer service, and they use chatbots. It allows companies of any size to be using chatbots through providing the product sort of out of the box, if you like. And if we move on to the next slide, GridCog, as we talked about, is all around this managing large companies as they transition to net zero, so where they're managing lots of different types of renewable energy assets. I'll move to the next slide. Follow-on investing, again, important. So this is the concept that we back our companies when they're young with a relatively small check, and then as they progress, as they grow, as our confidence grows in their business model, we're able to fund them further. And you can see that we Provica, Gravity, Panacea, Runa all received further funding, and this is very much a feature of how we look to invest. So that's that balance of new portfolio activity, new investment portfolio activity, as well as supporting our portfolio through follow-on. Next slide, please. I mentioned that we did have an exit. So Ophelos was sold. This was in a year when there was very little M&A activity. So nice to see an exit despite that. It was an investment we weren't in for very long. And they, for those of you who may remember, this was helping using a digital platform to assist with debt collection in a more ethical and a more effective way. So that was a business that we, in very short order, made 2.1 times our money, and we wish Ophelos every success in their new home. So we move to the next slide, please. Really, this is really putting down on paper, what we've talked about. So it's been investing through that seed, which is the early stage, all to more mature businesses, so Series B, so potentially 200 odd people plus. We are backing those long-term trends of software assisting digitalization, the need to make healthcare more efficient, and the increasing importance of software to assist that transition to net zero in all the forms that will take. But just to be, in terms of volume of activity, our focus is very much on that software and healthcare piece, and very much focused on B2B. So we do not invest in consumer-facing businesses and all the volatility that comes with that. We look to sell to corporates, typically large corporates. Next slide, please. Touching on ESG, we continue to do what we've always done, which is backing long-term sustainable businesses and actually believing that companies that do the right thing, that are sustainable, that do have a well-developed and increasingly developed ESG strategy will give rise to long-term value creation. Very much has been a theme and continues to be a theme, and we work with our companies as they work through their ESG journey, and making sure these companies are well placed when they come to exit, where they're invariably bought by companies who themselves will have very mature and well-defined ESG strategies. And then what we're increasingly doing is measuring how ESG is operating across the portfolio, so collecting that data so that in time we have we have more evidence to back up the well-established principle that long-term sustainable companies will deliver greater value. But also, as part of our commitment to ESG, we are signatory to the UNPRI, to whom we report on an annual basis. Next slide, please. Albion itself is very focused on this. So this is Albion, the manager. So we look to see how we ourselves can improve our ESG credentials in terms of our impact on the environment. Whether that's looking at our carbon impact. We look at how we can help the world around us in terms of our social engagement, and then governance is absolutely key to what we do as an investment manager, and in all our interactions, particularly with shareholders and indeed with your board of this VCT. So if we move to the next slide, please. So Thomas Chambers, Fiona has already said words of thanks, which I would now like to do on behalf of the manager. Thomas Chambers has been a really great director for many years. His involvement with Albion has been since we took over the management of this VCT back in October 2011, but his involvement with the VCT predated that, and indeed the first time that I met Thomas was when he ran a very effective process to appoint us as the new manager. And then he has been forensic in his delivery of ensuring shareholder value, and it made absolutely sense to us when he took up the role of chair of the audit committee, where he has been a great support to us, but also a great custodian of you, the shareholders, and your investment. So we will very much miss Thomas. However, we very much hope that he'll keep in touch. And if I, on behalf of Albion, can thank Thomas for his many wise words, his great support to both the VCT but to Albion as well. So Thomas, thank you from all of us at Albion. Next slide, please. So looking forward, how are things going to pan out? Clearly, the world is still full of uncertainties, and to the point where it feels like I've been saying that forever. I think there are some things are improving. I think there is a little bit of growth. We do have political uncertainty in the short term, the recently announced election and the outcome of that. However, we do sit as VCTs, I believe, with good support for what VCTs do, that they are a critical part of providing funding to young, growing, innovative companies in the UK. Certainly in my discussions with both sides of the political divide, I do feel that there is good recognition of that. And we as VCTs, and this VCT in particular, stand ready to make our contribution to funding those small, highly innovative companies that will be the engine of growth. We continue to have limited exposure to consumer spending, which I think is wise. While there is still uncertainty out there, growth is still relatively limited. But I think on the whole, one can look forward with more optimism. We are seeing, when we look at our portfolio companies, we see the growth rates and our revenue growth rates have increased this year, but still early days. So cause for a bit more optimism would be my analysis, but we're not yet completely out of the woods. Meanwhile, the company is well placed with cash available. We are looking at new investments. Our investment level is noticeably up on last year, which I think is, again, to my point on confidence. And then if we move to the next slide, just I just want to touch very briefly before I go on to the first quarter results. Is really just a request that people, the shareholders, where they can, do participate in voting in AGMs in particular. And it is your opportunity to have your say on behalf of the company. We have been working to make voting easier, recognising that it does require a decision to do it. So as people are becoming increasingly electronic in how they do things, there is now the opportunity to vote electronically. We now send out 2 reminders by email to shareholders who are signed up for electronic communications. They are a reminder. They provide all the information you need to go through by clicking through on the link provided to the voting site, and you then need a shareholder number and a PIN number. So hopefully that is relatively straightforward. And if you do get that reminder email, if you could vote, I think the board would very much appreciate that, because at the end of the day, you are the owners of the business, and it's your opportunity to interact with the decisions and the resolutions that the board are proposing. If you don't do it via the email there, you can do it by going directly to the voting website, and also indeed, as Fiona has highlighted earlier in her opening remarks, Lumi as a platform, so the platform on which we are currently presenting, does allow for live voting. So providing you are attending as a shareholder today, even if you haven't previously voted, you still have the opportunity to do so. So a little plea on behalf of the board for voting. I think it would be a great ambition if we could increase the interaction with the shareholders. So thank you for giving me the chance to plug that particular point. Then if we move on to the next slide, we have continued to make good progress in the first quarter, and this has been driven by the potential exit of egress. So nice to see a 2.65% increase in NAV, and that's for the quarter. So that's first quarter return has exceeded last year. Egress, the position there is that we have agreed a sale, and indeed have exchanged contracts on the sale. But just to be clear, that sale is subject to regulatory sign-off, and that is a process that will take a number of months. So it's a great exit in the offering, but it will only be done when that regulatory approval comes through, which I hope to be able to report later in the year. But it's been a great investment and a fantastic team. But I'll be able to talk more to that next year. We will continue to run our shareholder seminar. Details on this slide. Please note the new venue. We thought we'd try a new venue, and please note the date. But it is a physical face-to-face venue that the board believes is very important, because gives us an opportunity to meet our shareholders in person, and it's an opportunity to have a really extensive Q&A live, and it also gives me the opportunity to talk about the year ended in terms of across all the VCTs, but it also allows us to get presentations from a couple of investee companies, and we are arranging other events which will be publicised nearer the time. So lots going on. Dividend has been declared, and on that note, I will hand back to Fiona, who is going to compare the Q&A session. So over to you, please.
Great, thanks. Well, that was a good presentation to hear, and as a board, as you know, we're very excited about prospects too. We've got lots of exciting things going on in the VCT, so it's good to share that with shareholders. We're now going to questions from members. We've got a few who've come in already. A question we're often asked, or we have been the last couple of years, is why no physical meeting? Why are we still doing a virtual AGM? I talked about it a little bit earlier, but also Will, in fact, has just mentioned in his presentation, the Investor Day has become a really important day for investors, shareholders, companies alike. It's a really good opportunity for you as shareholders to come and meet companies, to speak to all the boards who will be there. Some people are investors in multiple VCTs. Good opportunity to see companies far more extensive than we could manage at an AGM. And I'd really encourage people to come along. It was one of the sort of small benefits of the pandemic that allowed us to actually test different systems as to what might work better going forward. And actually what we've discovered is that we reach out to many more people by doing it in this virtual fashion. And it doesn't disenfranchise anyone from voting or getting involved. So we very much like the format as a board, and with Albion, we're supportive of that, and we'll continue until something even cleverer comes along to continue in this way. But I would encourage both the questioners today, why no physical meeting, to really join us at the Investor Day. Another question that's come up, and actually, funny enough, I raised it myself, is regarding the sunset clause. When Parliament was suddenly dissolved, I suddenly had a panic and thought, crikey, does that mean the Finance Act has been dissolved? But no, it hasn't, and it's all moving in the right direction. But I'd like to just hand over to Will just to answer in a little bit more detail about that. But the good news is it's moving in the right direction. But Will, perhaps you could put a bit more meat on the bone on that one.
Yes, absolutely, Fiona. And just by way of reminder, the sunset clause was the point in time, which is April 2025, where the scheme theoretically came to an end, unless it was extended. And the extension that was put forward, and indeed has now been put into legislation, which was the Finance Act, is that the scheme will be extended for 10 years to 2035. So, good news that gives us great visibility. And it's very consistent with the approach to a scheme like the VCT, that there's this sort of periodic 10-year review. So that gives us great bits. Because of European legislation, the questioner is absolutely right. There is a process that still requires EU state aid sign-off. That process is going through. The officials of Treasury are in the process of doing that. They have confirmed to me that that is going well, and they are confident that will happen in due course. The way the legislation has been enacted is that there is no requirement to go back to Parliament. A commencement order needs to be signed by the relevant minister, and that will happen automatically when that EU sign-off happens. In terms of the election, clearly the election does give rise to a 6-week period where things do broadly come to a grinding halt. There's no certainty that would stop that commencement offer happening, but it might do. But the point being, we've got plenty of time until April for the commencement order, which is triggered by that European order. So as we sit here today, there is a process going through. It hasn't changed, particularly because of the election being called. It is in good stead, and we have no reason to believe that the sunset clause won't be extended by April, which is the relevant date.
That's great. Thanks, Will, for the confirmation. I think we're certainly moving in the right direction as an industry. And that's it, actually, for questions. We've only got a couple today. So we'll now move on and continue with the formal business of the AGM. The full text of each of the resolutions were set out in the notice of the meeting, and the board is recommending that members do vote in favour of all the resolutions. I'll briefly summarise these below. The first resolution is to receive and adopt the company's accounts for the year ended 31 December 23, together with the strategic report and the reports of the director and the auditor. The second resolution is to approve the director's remuneration report for the year ended 31 December 2023. The third resolution is my own re-election as a director of the company. The fourth resolution is the re-election of Swarupa Pataki as a director of the company. And the fifth resolution is the election of Simon Thorpe as a director of the company. The sixth resolution is the appointment of Johnson Carmichael as auditor of the company to hold office from the conclusion of the meeting to the conclusion of the next meeting at which the accounts are to be laid. The 7th resolution is to authorise the directors to agree to the auditor's remuneration. The 8th resolution is to allow the directors to allot shares. The 9th resolution is a special resolution which gives directors the power to disapply preemption rights. And the penultimate resolution is again a special resolution, and that is to authorise the company to make one or more market purchases of ordinary shares in the capital of the company. And the final resolution provides the company with the option to provide a 14-day notice period for a general meeting should this become necessary. The results of the voting, including the proxy votes on each of the resolutions, will be announced after the AGM through a regulatory information service announcement, an RNS. Additionally, the results will be published on the Albion Capital website as soon as is practicable. I can now confirm that voting has finished and I declare the poll closed. In the meantime, I will show on the screen the current proxy votes that have been received by the registrar. As you will note, the proxy votes are comfortably in favour of all the proposed resolutions. That concludes the formal business of the AGM. I would, however, like to thank all members who have joined the AGM today by webcast. The board welcomes any feedback you may have, and you're more than welcome to send an email to kchair@albion.capital. I will now formally close the AGM, and on behalf of the board, thank you all for joining the company's AGM. Thank you.